I would argue, and a lot of people, would argue that orcs and other inherently evil races, like goblinoids, in general, are often used as stand-ins, right, for black people, Asian people, disabled people, Jewish people, etc., which is why their portrayal, I think, is really troubled and fraught and deserves a close examination.
Very interesting theory, but you overlook one very important point. He's stupid. It's the most stupid theory I ever heard.
Welcome back, YouTube. So this is what we're up against. These are the demented people trying to ruin a very successful 50-year franchise. Before we get into the subject of today's video, I was wondering if you could do me a huge favor. Go ahead and throw a like on this, and if you like what you're hearing, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot to me. And share this video out there. I think it's important you do so. All right, so that was Connie Chang. Not Connie Chung, Connie Chang. And I first heard of her via one of RPGPundit's videos, where he was talking about Wizards of the Coast turning the races into a gray ooze, for lack of a better term. I'll link that in the description below. It's a good video. You should go check it out. He referenced an awful Gizmodo article, and that's where I went down the rabbit hole with Miss Chang, who is transgender but appears to be fine with any pronouns, so I will refer to Connie as a she. And man, digging into some of the stuff she was saying, it was like a trip down the Nung River. This person has some serious issues. She runs a live game on Twitch and YouTube called Transplaner, and everyone involved in that is trans. And this is her elevator pitch for that game.
What I'm currently doing with my own campaign, Transplaner, to execute my vision of a non-colonial, anti-orientalist world.
Right, so non-colonial and anti-orientalist. I'm getting that fun vibe already, aren't you? So before we get into the political aspects of all this, just from a purely gameplay point of view, you should run very far away from any GM who is talking about executing their vision. You are just along for the ride, and usually a malignant narcissist is the engineer on that train. I've watched some of the games on Transplaner, which is awful, by the way, as you'd expect. But she loves hearing herself talk. I mean, there are almost 15-minute diatribes where the players are just sitting there watching her talk. That is not good DMing. Most of the players at times look a little bored, and of course they're not going to say anything because they're down with her cause, I'm sure, whatever that is. So she mentions non-colonial. But what exactly does she mean by that?
So let's start with non-colonial. In order to understand what non-colonial means, we first have to have a common understanding of what colonial means. Makes sense, right? The occupation of one country by another with the intent to populate the occupied country with the occupier country's citizens.
Right. Oh, you mean like the Chinese expansion during the Han and Tang dynasties, right? Or maybe the flood of people from Africa and the Middle East coming into Europe right now, no?
Right, so like a colonialist attitude toward fantasy conflict would be something like, let's just go in and like kill all the orcs, right? They're the bad guys, who gives a shit? We just hack and slash and we loot their dead bodies, right? To wander into uncharted, uncivilized wilderness and kill monsters, get loot, and come back and fuck girls, right? Like that's another really colonialist attitude toward tabletop gaming.
So we've been doing it wrong all these years, ladies and gentlemen. You need to go and make amends with the spirit of Chief Turbag, the Orc King, whose skull you split and who you so disrespectfully teabagged afterwards.
I think that not only is this kind of play loop, right? Get in, kill, get XP, get loot, get out, right? And then rinse, repeat, do it over and over again. No, not only is this kind of play loop, like unimaginative, right? After a while and maybe kind of boring, I think it's kind of harmful. Like what kinds of stories are we telling here, right? Like what does it mean for a place in the world to be quote unquote uncivilized or quote unquote uncharted, right? I mean, British colonizers thought the United States was uncivilized and uncharted. The United States. I'm using the colonizers term for America, right?
So first of all, note the unmitigated arrogance there. She looks down on you for wanting to turn your brain off for a little bit, maybe have some fun with friends after working all week by just rolling dice, hacking and slashing over a few beers. And plus, she supposes that all of you peons are only capable of being stuck in that particular loop. Like literally, she thinks that every time you guys sit down, your DM says, well, guess what? Those orcs are at it again. As if any group wouldn't get tired of that. But you have to understand, cultural Marxists like her, they hate you. They think you're a fool for going to work and earning an honest living, especially blue-collar folks. She probably thinks that she should earn quite a bit more money than you just from running her terrible live plays. But by saying you better watch your step in labeling any area uncivilized and savage, she's trying to get you to think twice before doing it in-game. Now, in a wild success scenario for her, creators in literature and film will do the same, and they are doing the same. They don't want to give anyone an escape from the miserable lives that they lead. These are profoundly sick individuals, and they want to drag you down to their own personal nessus. They're telling you that 2 and 2 equals 5, and a not insignificant part of the world is telling you that they're right. That you better listen to them, or you're a phobe or an ist.
A non-colonialist world in that case would be a world where hack and slash, kill 'em all, conquer the infidels, that sort of attitude toward conflict is not the default, is not the normative approach to problem solving, right? A non-colonial approach then explores alternatives to handling problems and alternative ways of imagining problems in the first place that aren't based on diametrically opposed groups drawn along racial and or ethnic lines, right? So in Ndake, non-colonial is sort of means two things. It means the non-normative approach to solving problems, and also it means that Ndake, in a very literal way, has never been, is not, and will never be colonized. There is no nations here are literally or figuratively colonizing the other, right? All nations in Ndake, as you can tell in the map over here, have relatively equal amounts of power, let's say, and the conflict between them then refuses to cast one side as the definitive bad guy.
And so first of all, if you can't tell, Ndake is her homebrew world. And to me, it sounds ridiculous and boring. But the difference is that I have no problem with her running a ridiculous, boring game where everyone gets along and dramatic tension is ignored. She wants to police what we think and do at the table, and we could care less what she does. And again, she comes off as extremely arrogant. Like people, even in the most hack and slash games, don't use alternative problem-solving methods. But this is the level of mental illness we're dealing with. Think about this for a minute. She extends the benefit of the doubt to an imaginary creature in an imaginary game, yet has almost no problem painting broad swaths of the player base as white, cis, uneducated goobers. All right, so now she talks about anti-orientalism. What is that? Well, take it away, Connie.
Orientalism is the fetishized construction of an Orient through which the West creates an understanding of itself as a superior and civilized culture.
Now that's funny. The West has no issues with samurai. Why to this day do we lionize them? When we talk about the great Chinese dynasties of the past, it's never in comparison with the West. It's on its own merits. When was the last time you heard someone say, sure, Genghis Khan conquered the world, but it was nothing compared to the modern West? Doesn't happen. What she really has a problem with here is acknowledging cultural differences that can't be ignored. She apparently thinks that Far Eastern culture is perfect and above reproach, which it isn't. And it's full of a lot of ugliness, just like the West.
What is an anti-orientalist world, right? When we think about this definition, an anti-orientalist world then is one that rejects normative narratives about non-Western countries, cultures, and histories. Simple as that. So when we put non-colonial and anti-orientalist in the same sentence, phrase, descriptor together, right? What does this mean? This means envisioning a world where we embrace alternative ways of imagining conflict, right? That's the non-colonial side. And in the process, we champion non-normative methods of portraying cultures that do not belong to us.
Boy, that campaign sounds like a barrel of fun, doesn't it? With her and others like her, It's not gaming. It's political indoctrination delivered through gaming. Right now, it's with like-minded people. My question for you is, will you give into it? Are you going to think twice about murdering a bunch of unfriendlies in the savage wilderness? If you do, for even 1 second, people like Connie are winning.
A focus on Eurocentrism and racism in fantasy tabletop gaming. So what does it mean, right, to build a fantasy world where the Western European imaginary, let's say, is not the foundation of creation? And what I mean, right, by the Western European imaginary is like Tolkien-esque elves, dwarves, orcs, right? Like I mentioned before, races that are diametrically opposed and biologically or divinely, right, determined. Like the gods, you know, like I think in Tolkien, like orcs are just like evil elves, right? And they were like made by like an evil god. I haven't read too many of his works, so I might be misrepresenting it, but
I found this particularly funny. Now, obviously, Tolkien is never necessary reading for playing a game with silly dice. But if she's going to try a scholarly deconstruction of a game based in large part on his works, it's a bit curious to have not even read any of his seminal works. Again, I think this is just arrogance on her part. She thinks, honestly, that she's better than Tolkien.
A common rebuttal I hear to this argument is that, well, you're the real racist here if you think of black, Asian, Jewish, disabled, etc. people. When you look at orcs, I don't think of that. I don't see race. I think that's a really fucking weak argument for several reasons, because it completely ignores the context of like literally everything. It's like the sketch by Key and Peele, country music.
Right, and here's where we find out that she built her house on sand. Her rebuttal is a generic hand wave that it ignores the context of everything, whatever the hell that means. Then she slyly segues into a Key and Peele sketch that has nothing to do with this. So in the sketch, Key welcomes his new neighbor Peele to Texas and regales him with country songs that are increasingly racist. The problem is that in the sketch, the things in the song are all well-known, real-world racist tropes. In D&D, as far as orcs are concerned, nobody thought of any of this stuff until cultural Marxists decided to hijack it. The trope of a savage nation attacking a civilization goes back to biblical times and ancient Rome. In fact, the word orc, as we all know, has its origins in Rome. Orcus, the god of the underworld. And that's the entirety of her explanation. You're ignoring the context of everything, and here's a forgettable sketch that really doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about.
So my question to y'all, you know, folks who are maybe on the fence or like not so convinced, when are you gonna fucking see it? You know, everyone else does. When the fuck are you gonna see it? Let's have like a little lecture here and read this quote from Volos. Savage and fearless, orc tribes are ever in search of elves, dwarves, and humans to destroy. Motivated by their hatred of the civilized races of the world and their need to satisfy the demands of their deities, right? Like what I said earlier about divinely determined, right? The orcs know that if they fight well and bring glory to their tribe, Groomsh will call them home. That's from page 82 of Volos. Before I dissect that a little, let's read another quote from Volos. This is from page 120. Orcs are vicious raiders who believe that the world should be theirs. And to that I say, projection much. The chief conceit, right, of Orientalism is the creation of this imaginary other, right, on which whiteness projects its own fears, its own lack of self-worth, its own degradation. Like the ones who are raping, raiding, murdering, genociding, exploiting, torturing, bombing, kidnapping. It's not fucking orcs, dude. It's fucking you. Get your shit together.
Yeah, but nobody sane sees it. Only profoundly mentally ill racists who think black people look like this do. We have to decide how we react to social media and how it influences our lives. A few thousand people on Twitter disliking something is not broad support. Catering to sick individuals has ruined the comics industry. It's gutted Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and a bunch of other franchises. Yet this fear persists. We need people with a backbone to say, you know what? You're wrong, and this is just a game, but please feel free to make any changes you want. But we know Wizards of the Coast won't do that. It's a company of cowards. And 3 white guys in charge of it will make any bargain because they understand that by even their own ideology, they should be gone. And a trans, disabled black woman should be leading this game. All right, so how does Connie handle the self-made race dilemma? It's actually a species dilemma, by the way, in my opinion. Part of me wonders if they had been called species from the start, whether we'd even be having this conversation. Race is a very charged term. It's always been acceptable to be any of the real human races in the game. I mean, from the 1970s on. It took people looking to drag civilization down to do a bait and switch by ignoring that fact and putting black people in the place of a savage outlander. It's utterly ridiculous.
Well, race in D&D kind of sucks. Both like socially, from a socially critical lens, right? But also from like a mechanical lens. It really limits the kinds of characters you can make. If you want like Adventurers League legal, right? If you want to play an orc wizard, your orc wizard will never be as good as like a normal like human or like elf wizard because of that -2 to your intelligence score that you cannot change unless you homebrew it, which again is not legal in Adventurers League. We used a system built by this guy called James Introcasu. Thank you, James. But it's basically actually a very super fun system where you use a point buy mechanic to buy racial traits that aren't tied down to any one race. So what does this look like? You could have a dwarf that has wings, like Aarakocra, and has a fly speed. You can be a human with acid breath. You can be an elf with stone cunning. You could, be a tabaxi with the lucky trait, whatever. Like it's completely up to you. Let's say you want to be a human with acid breath. Let's say you grew up in a swamp and you watched toads throw up acid, like big, monster magic toads, and you learned from them how to throw up acid, and you can actually breathe acid. That's fucking dope, right?
And again, this is the lunacy we're up against. Someone who thinks that you can learn to have a physical trait from another species. It's fucking insane. What do you even say to this? I mean, I'm out of answers. It's just so fucking stupid. As for that earlier point buy stuff, I mean, it's like Pundit said in his video. It's a gray ooze. Everyone is special, which means that nobody is special.
So in Transplanar, how we're tackling this is your race that you choose in the beginning does not inform your ASIs, which is shorthand for ability score increases during the character creation process. Instead, your ASIs are determined by your country of origin, which is our attempt to emphasize nurture over nature. So certain countries in Andake have certain values, and ability score increases are tied to those values. So it's like if you're brought up in a country that values physical strength, and intelligence, then your strength and intelligence score will go up. Instead of, oh, I'm an orc, I guess I'm dumb, which is also really ableist.
So she's one step away from making our own argument with her homebrew world. The only thing we'd need to do is to declare orcs a nation or a kingdom. Have them emphasize physical strength and warlike pursuits and downplay intellectual activities. Probably something that every fucking DM has done in their game with orcs. It proves the ridiculous nature of her argument that it can be destroyed by neatly fitting it into her terrible campaign without even breaking her own rules. Right, so finally watch here as Miss How Dare You Paint a Civilization with a Broad Brush defaults to lazy DM mode.
And even the kingdoms that do exist, right, aren't modeled off of Western European paradigms at all. Xiulong is based off dynastic China, and Uhanahi is based off the kingdom of Hawaii. The United Tribes of Jukai, that strip with like the horse-shaped lake, is loosely modeled off of medieval Japan. The commune of Morose up north is basically fantasy Russia. The Republic of Talmud is modeled off of a conglomeration of medieval India and the Roman Republic. The clans of Kirtal are based off of, the medieval confederations of tribes of Mongolia right before the formation of the Mongol Empire.
Basically Russia, pretty much China. They're like Japan. Now, is that Imperial Japan that slaughtered millions of Chinese people? Or are we not allowed to talk about that, Connie? All right. Well, that's it for today. That's all I can take. Keep fighting against this ridiculous bullshit. If you're a DM, have a nice orc invasion and have them led by Queen Connie the Stupid. That's all. Remember again, like, subscribe, and share this video out there. It really is important. That is how we win. Take care of yourself and good day.